Hey guys, it's time for some more tutorials, and my name is Magnet. Today we're going to be talking about using Dark Templar in PvP, and it should be noted that most Dark Templar builds are actually for safety and for getting a safe expansion up. So this isn't something like showing you how to cheese or rush Dark Templar or anything like that, and you shouldn't think about Dark Templar in PvP like that. You should think of it more as a safety tech and kind of a tech to get you a safe second base. So we're going to be talking a lot about those openers, a lot of different ways to use DTs throughout the game, and kind of more importantly adjustments that you need to make based upon what you're playing against. So this is going to be a lot about how to open with them, because as the game goes on you're going to kind of regulate into things that are not DTs anyway, so we won't focus too much about that. But anyway, let's start talking about the game here. And the player we're going to be looking at is actually Liquid Hero. He's playing against Huck. Fast forward just a little bit and I'll explain these openers as they come along. So Hero, of course, the 9 Pylon, the 13 Gateway, all really standard stuff in this matchup, nothing too unusual. So he gets that up. With DTs, you're usually going to want to double gas at the same time, so Hero does that on 15. He's going to keep going ahead and into his build here. And he has a Cybernetics core, which we'd normally expect. After this, there's a lot of different ways to transition here. The best thing that you want to do is you want to start your Mothership core right away, because the Mothership core is going to offer you a lot of safety from little gateway attacks with the overcharge, and it'll buy you enough time to let your Dark Shrine finish before your first overcharge wears off. So starting out with the Mothership core is really the greatest idea as far as supplementing this build correctly. So Hero starts with a Stalker and a Mothership core. And this is where you can kind of vary this up. If you really wanted to, you could go Mothership core straight into the Twilight Council. Hero's going to play this a little bit safer and kind of a little more forward, I guess, because he's going to have more Stalkers out on the map to try and push away earlier attacks. So this is, I mean, it's kind of a trade-off. You can do whichever one you're most comfortable with. But basically, you do need to get the Twilight Council down as soon as you have pushed away the probe. Huck doing something annoying here and trapping in a couple probes with this pylon. One of the very rare players that actually still does that, but kind of incidental here. So he puts out the Stalker in the Mothership core, he's getting a second Stalker, and he puts down the Twilight Council. So this is kind of a more old school way to do this. It's to seek around for pylons on the map and maybe kill some units that are trying to pressure forward. You can deny scouting with this. You can see the second Stalker coming down right now. And back in Huck's base, there's really just some gateway stuff coming out. He's chrono boosting a lot of Stalkers, and he's chrono boosting Warp Gate. It's just for a really soft gateway pressure, and DTs are one of the best ways to deter these gateway pressures. So Hero goes ahead and drops his Dark Shrine. He's going to add 2 more gateways, but this is kind of a little bit of a weird reaction. Most of the time you'd actually add another gateway and a robo, and then you'd add your expansion. So the expansion is going to come down pretty reliably a little bit after 6 minutes, but it obviously depends on how many Stalkers you make, how many extra gateways you make, and stuff like that. So I would say that the 2 gateways and a robo transition is a lot safer, because you will want some sort of detection in case the other player is also going for DTs, and that can be one of the weirder games, but it's better to play safe, and it's better to kind of feel out and run in the same build so that you know all the little tiny intricacies in it. So it's going to open with DTs here, obviously. There's the robo now, and he has 3 gateways on the way. And you can pretty much just take your expansion whenever you feel like you're ready. And it's really the sooner the better. He is just getting into a little bit of fights out here on the map, so that's kind of unfortunate. I think he did lose a Stalker. And this is a pretty heavy gateway pressure coming up right now, 5 Stalkers against only the 2 of Hero, so you basically want to lure him in as far as you possibly can before you overcharge. And note, in all these games, the Dark Shrine is going to be as protected as possible from attack, so there's really no way these Stalkers can walk all the way back here and kill this Dark Shrine. So you will want to build it back behind your minerals and kind of protect it the best you can. So the overcharge comes up, and you'll note that this overcharge is going to last up until this Dark Shrine finishes. And then at this point, you really will want to think about having a pylon out on the map. So Liquid Hero already does have a pylon out, and he's scouting with this probe just to see what's going on in Huck's base. So Huck doesn't have an expansion, and your reactions can be a little different based upon whether they have an expansion or not. If they don't have an expansion, then things like DTs are still possible, so you probably want to start out with an observer here on your robotics. But if there's nothing back here and you're being pressured, you can always just walk this probe into the base and see what's going on. If he were to walk in here, he'd see 2 gateways and a robotics, and that's not anything overly alarming. He can go straight for Immortals if he wants to. You obviously don't really need detection against that. You will want the Observer anyway, just because if they're proxying something, you won't really know about it. But nevertheless, the idea here is that if you have a DT at their base and one at your base, they can't have detection in two places very easily. So you can see this Robo is coming up right now, and he'll have detection back at home first, but these Stalkers won't be able to stick around. You can just send 1 or 2 DTs down here and push these Stalkers away as much as you want because they won't be able to see you, and then you can secure your Nexus. So Hero is doing something a little bit unusual and warping in more Stalkers rather than trying to get this Immortal out. Huck realizes what's going on. This is probably DT, so he has to go home. And now Hero can freely expand basically whenever he wants. He's playing this a little bit overly cautious, mostly because something like Blink Observer is one of the better follow-ups against this, but most players won't follow up that crisply. And Huck back at home has to spend force fields and can expand while this DT is down here. So Hero knows pretty much everything that's going on. And like I said, you can send your DT down here and start pushing stuff away, maybe killing pylons and whatnot. But the whole goal here is really just to take a very safe expansion, which Hero is really waiting a long time on. You could have had this down quite a while ago, but he's just going to put it down now as he sees the pylon from Huck and whatnot. So it's a fairly equal game from here. So a lot of times DT plays will just normalize into normal games. But against players that do something really aggressive, like a big gateway attack without any detection, DTs can just straight up win the game a lot because they won't have any detection back at home, and you can kill their units at your base with your DTs. So a lot of good flexibility in terms of just fighting gateway openers. So next we're going to take a look at Whelmew versus Baby Knight, and we're going to try to vary this up so you get a lot of exposure to different types of openers from all these players. So that last one from Huck was basically a gateway timing with a robotics behind it. So I mean, pretty normal stuff. You're going to see that quite often. This time we're going to see a little bit of a different matchup between the two and explain a little bit of different intricacies that you probably want to change so you don't fall too far behind. So we're going to watch these guys come down. I can't remember if it's Baby Knight or Whelmew we're watching. I think it's Whelmew considering he's known for his DT builds. We'll have to see which one actually does it here. So one of these games is actually DT versus DT, so this might be the one. So here's Baby Knight putting up a Stargate actually, and Whelmew's the one putting down the Twilight Council, so we're going to see how these two match up. And actually I'm pretty sure he just stays on Stargate unless he gets scouted. No, he stays on Stargate. So this is more so about running DTs against Stargate builds. So you'll see from Whelmew, his build's going to be pretty similar to Heroes, except for he goes for, no, it is going to be really similar to Heroes. 3 gateways, and he also scouted with his Mothership Core, which is important to note. So now he knows there's a Stargate on the way. There's not much of a reason to start up a Robo here. So if you can find little ways to get scouting information off without losing your Mothership Core and without being too vulnerable to gateway timings, then that's also really useful. And you'll note that he scouted on this map mainly because the two mains are really close to one another. The DT, the Dark Shrine's about to finish up. He can overcharge pretty much at any time whenever he feels the need to. And he does it now, so he doesn't lose too much from that. 4th gateway is on the way here, and this is important because once he's shown the Phoenix, he realizes that Robo is really not going to do that much against Phoenix openers. You really want to get as many gateways up as possible, and probably start Blink once you get your first set of warp-ins done, considering Blink is a really good tech to have against Stargates. So the Dark Shrine's about to finish. We'll note that he does have pylons out on the map here, so you do need to keep a probe out there and keep putting up pylons. And then back in Baby Knight's base, if he doesn't put an Oracle out in time, then he's going to lose a lot of workers. And that's another way you can get ahead against Stargate. But the point being in this opener is that you really don't want to produce a Robo because there's not much of a reason to, at least for a little while. Eventually you will get into more Robotechs later on, but there's no reason to produce a Robo against like Phoenix and Oracles because they're not going to do anything against those. So Baby Knight's still trying to come in here. He's just double checking that there actually is a Dark Shrine. And like I said, most of the time with these DT openers, you're not going to do a lot of damage with them. It's mostly about being safe here, and the safety is that he has to keep stuff at home and he has to defend against this DT attack. And even still, he does get a few kills. He's up to 7 kills right now because there was a Zealot that got sent in here earlier that killed a few things. So it's a lot about counterattacking, it's a lot about just being safe. And now that he's safe, he can drop his Nexus and get into a later game. So the DT opener really doing well. And then Blink is going to be the follow-up like we talked about against the Stargate plays. So nothing too wild or unusual here. And you'll notice that it is still faster, the expansion is still faster than the opponent here. And if he does have Blink with this expansion and Overcharge available, then he can hold off a lot of different things with the Overcharge and the Blink, assuming he controls properly. And of course, since if you still have pylons out here on the map, and they're being super aggressive and attacking you, there also is the opportunity for warping in a DT or something and sending it into their base, and punishing them for maybe not having detection back at home if they decide to bring it with their armies. So there's a lot of different options to play with these DT openers, but I really want to stress that it's about safety, it's about flexibility, and it's about the transitions and follow-ups and whatnot that you do based upon what your opponent's doing to you. So this is going to be more of a kind of simple video. There's not a lot of utility later in the game with DTs. It's mostly just to get this expansion up, and then the DTs typically aren't that useful except for in situations where you want to harass with a Warp Prism and Zealots and stuff later in the game. Maybe you kill their cannons that they might have in their base, and then DTs can start tearing stuff down, but that's kind of a flimsy way to try and win. You usually want to play out more standard games. So this time we're going to be watching Bling versus Stardust. And I'm pretty sure this is the DT versus DT game, and it'll kind of advertise the reason you want to put up that robo sooner rather than later if you don't really know what's going on. Because whoever has the observer and whoever... I mean, in DT versus DT, if you don't have an observer, then you're dead. It's just, there's no two ways about it if you don't have detection. So, both of them running a very similar build, obviously, since they're both going into DTs, the double gas, standard gateway timings. Stardust is going to do this a little bit differently, though. He's going to go for a second gate before anything else, and that's just for a little bit of safety against some faster timings. And Bling, in the meantime, he's actually going to do something a little different. He's going to proxy his Dark Shrine tech, so that it'll be a lot harder for Stardust to scout. This is a little bit more of a sneaky play. You don't necessarily have to do stuff like this. I wouldn't worry too much about doing stuff like this, because if this gets caught, that's a big problem. I would just do it in your main, but this is always an option. So Stardust also getting his Dark Shrine tech put together, so you can see, I'll drop this in just a second. Yeah, both of them are on Dark Shrine now, so this is why the follow-up into a robotics facility really early on after your extra gateways is very important. So Stardust already has the robo coming up right now, and Bling can't waste too much more time. He needs to get the robo down as soon as possible, especially because he doesn't know what's going on. So there's a lot of pylons out here for Bling. He can definitely warp in DTs, and there's finally the robo. He might have a little bit of trouble here, and you should note that usually the time for the faster ends of DT builds is about 6:45. That's when you're going to want to try to have an observer on the field. If you can't get one quickly enough, Bling also does have this sentry so that he can force field the ramp when he sees the Dark Shrine, or rather the DT shimmer. So he does have a couple of units here just to hold off for a little bit. And note that they're both taking their Nexus right about now. So pretty quick Nexus builds, very safe, and against one another with the DT builds. Neither one of them should really do a lot of damage, but they will have the punishing aspect in case one of them forgets the robo. So Stardust is already warping in these DTs, and you'll notice that from Bling's vision here, you have to have a really keen eye, but you can see a little bit of the outline and the shimmer from these two DTs. If you look really closely, you can see if they're not, if we can see them, that's right where they are, but you can still see the shimmer moving, and you can force field in time. So he didn't quite realize it in time, so that's unfortunate for him. He's going to lose a lot here, while his own DT got killed in the main base. So the slower robo in DT versus DT is definitely going to cost you, and you can see the worker counts starting to kind of stack up here on both sides from not quite having that done in time. So DT versus DT is pretty weird. There's also the follow-up that you can try, especially against DTs, and this should be noted if you get into DT versus DT, the transition, whereas usually it's things like Blink, usually a Warp Prism with DT drops is going to be really good, and also going into Immortal drops can be really good after this as well. So we'll watch a little bit more to see how Bling starts to punish Stardust later in this game. We'll note that Stardust isn't really doing too much, and of course the alternative is researching Blink, but typically you don't want to make a lot of Stalkers with DT openers because your opponent will very often be going into Immortals, and those have a very limited usefulness. So Bling getting the Warp Prism here, he can drop off one DT here in the main, and if they didn't make multiple observers, or if they don't have a cannon here in the mineral line, you can start to attack stuff here and then send it back to your Warp Prism. And then if you have a second DT somewhere else out on the map, say you just have it waiting right here, as soon as they move their observer away, you can walk back into the other side and kill some workers there too. So there's a lot of multi-pronging potential with DT follow-ups, but it's mostly against mirror DT builds or builds that just have a single robo and no blink, stuff like that. Obviously doing it against Stargate is a big risk because you can get your Warp Prism shot down, but As long as you can keep this DT alive and maybe pull it back to your Warp Prism, you can get a lot done. And you can see he's already equalized the workers killed throughout this because of the little Warp Prism harass tactics. And like I said, Immortal drops following this up is pretty common as well. That was a big thing in PvP a long time ago, but it's still pretty strong. Namely because most of the time against a DT player, they're not going to want to make a lot of Stalkers and they won't want to make Blink. So if you follow up with the Immortal drops, then it's really hard to deal with that because you have to use your own Immortals and DTs and Zealots and stuff to try to hold that off. So a lot of different utility with the DT openers, but like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a shorter video because there's not a whole lot to go over after the initial openers. So hope this at least gave you guys some good ideas for how to use Dark Templar in PvP. I'll of course always be back for more tutorials, and I have more down in the description if you want to check that out. So I will see you guys later, and take care in the meantime.